Okay, today we're talking about 5.5, and these are the different theorems: side, 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 congruence theorem, and the hypotenuse leg. Okay, so in previous videos you've learned about side, angle, side. Side, side, side is going to be represented by SSS, and then hypotenuse leg, it's only with right triangles. Okay, and you have to have one leg and one hypotenuse that's going to be congruent in order for the triangles to be congruent. Okay, so let's take a look at side, side, side. It states if three sides of one triangle are congruent to three sides of a second triangle, then the two triangles are congruent. So if you're given an actual picture, see we have the one tip mark, so I would label that an S. We have two tip marks on either side, so that's another S, and then we have three tip marks, and that's another S. So you can actually look at your picture and the way you drew it, and we see it's by side, side, side congruence. Hypotenuse leg is pretty much the same exact thing. Here AC is a leg, okay, and here DF is a leg as well. AB is our hypotenuse, and in the other triangle DE is our hypotenuse. And the reason why this works is if you do Pythagorean theorem, you should be able to find BC and EF, and they'll end up being congruent as well, but this just saves you a little bit of time. Okay, so let's do some examples real quick. Okay, in these exercises, we're going to determine whether the congruent statement is true, and you can explain your reasoning. So if we take a look at number 1, I see that AB and DE have one tip mark. BC and DC also have one tip mark, so that's S and S so far, two sides. And then I see AC has two tip marks and EC has two tip marks, that's another S. So yes, they are congruent by side, side, side. And that's all there is to it. If you look at number 2, we have triangle KGH is congruent to HJK. Alright, so if we take a look at GH, it has one tip mark, JK has one tip mark. We have JK has 2, HJ has 2. And then in order for it to be side, 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 we need this third side to be congruent. And actually, since they are lined up right on top of one another, that is actually the reflexive property. Oh my gosh, I can't spell. Meaning that this side is actually indeed equal to itself. So yes, by side, 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 and reflexive property. Okay. Alright, and one other thing I want to bring up that I didn't yet. You also want to make sure that since you have your congruent statements that A is actually equal to angle E, B is equal to angle D, and C is equal to angle C. Alright, well here we have C and C, and it happens to be between a side that has one tip mark and two tip marks. So on the other side, I want to make sure that it's actually between one tip mark and two tip marks. If that happens to be true, then yes, they are going to be the same angle. Let's take a look at A. It's between one tip mark and two tip marks. E is also between one tip mark and two tip marks. So yes, those are going to be good and in the same area. Here we have B and D, and you see how it's between sides with one tip mark, and D is also between sides that have one tip mark. Well, we know that those are also going to be congruent. So this congruent statement is actually in the correct order. Let's take a look at number 2. We can do the same thing. If we start with K, it needs to be congruent to H. Okay, so K is between the 3 tip marks and the 2. H is also between 3 tip marks and 2. So that first one's good. G needs to be equal to J. G is between 1 tip mark and 2. J is also between 1 tip mark and 2. So that one's okay. The last one, H needs to have the same amount of tip marks as K. Well, it's between 1 tip mark and 3. And on the other side, we have 1 tip mark and 3. So, indeed, they are in the right order. Now, let's take a look at number 3. We can see that number 3 has 1, 2, and 3 tip marks. Side, side, side. Which is right. However, we need to make sure we check that our angles are in the correct order. So, according to our congruent statement, U needs to be congruent to angle X. If I take a look at U, it's between 1 tip mark and 2, and X is between 1 tip mark and 3 tip marks. That's not right. This is in the wrong order, so that's not okay. So no, angles are not in the right order. Okay, and let's take a look at number 4. RST, so RST and RPQ. We're going to see if those are congruent. We do see that our tip marks 1, 2, and 3, 1, 2, and 3, and then 1, 2, and 3. So we do know that if this indeed is the right order, it's going to be by side, side, side. R is 1 tip mark to S, to 2, to T, which we ended up with 3. So let's take a look at this one. 1 tip mark, 2 tip mark, 3 tip marks. Okay, that ends up being in the right order. So yes, by side, 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 and the statement is true. Angles are congruent. Good. Last thing we're going to do is we're going to actually do a proof. Okay, so it says redraw the triangle so that they are side by side with corresponding parts in the same position. Then write a proof. Alright, so I'm going to have A, B, C. We have a right angle and then our hypotenuse. Here we're going to have our right angle, which is D. E is at the top. B is at the end. We know the hypotenuse is equal. Okay. The first thing you write is your given information. Okay. And so from that given information, the part that's really important is that B is the midpoint of CD. That means that BD and CB are going to be congruent. Okay, you have to make sure you write this in the correct order. If I go from the right angle out to my hypotenuse, I need to go from the right angle out to my hypotenuse. Okay, so CB is congruent to DB, and the reason is by the definition of a midpoint. And now, since we have two right triangles, we have actually proven that they are congruent. So I can write one proven statement. Triangle ABC is congruent to triangle EBD. And the reason is I now have my hypotenuse and I have a leg that are congruent. So it's by hypotenuse leg. Okay, and that's it for this video.